Today we're going to go into the unknown. We're going to go into the advanced sequencer and start figuring out how to use this thing. Hi, I'm Dave from Astro, and yeah, I'm finally going to go there. We're going to go into the advanced sequencer, and essentially what we're going to do is just look at it from a high level, not getting in too much detail, because you can get into a lot of detail really quick in this tool. It's a helpful tool, but it's easy to get lost in it, and that's what I want to avoid, is you getting lost in this incredibly useful tool. So to get to the advanced sequencer, of course, you're going to go to the 5th tab of the main menu tab section here, and it's going to say sequencer. And you notice here that, like I said in the previous video, that these 4 buttons here up front are for really the legacy sequencer. It's this magic button right here at the very end called the advanced sequencer that gets you into this particular tool. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on that. And here you go. So here's what you're confronted with. And it doesn't look too bad right now, but once you start adding stuff, it gets really complicated fairly fast, or can get pretty complicated fairly fast. So the first thing that you notice is that on the left side of the page, you have 3 areas. You have an area here called a sequence start area. You have an area here called sequence target area, and then you have the sequence end area. Now, in the sequence start area, this is where you can put startup pieces of your sequence. In other words, maybe you want to cool your camera, maybe you want to unpark your mount, those kinds of things. They would go up here in the sequence start area. And then in your target area, your sequence target area, this is where you would put your target information, you'd put your imaging session information, everything relating to your imaging session, everything from auto-guiding to, autofocus to guiding to image acquisition, all that kind of stuff goes into this middle sequence target area. And then at the end here is sequence end area. These are things that you want to have done at the very last to kind of wrap up your session. So it may be parking your scope and warming up your camera. Those would be instructions to put here at the sequence end area. Now, what's interesting about these 3 areas, think of them as big boxes, if you will. You can save each box out as a template, and you can reuse that template. And in fact, n.i.n.a comes with 3 templates already provided. You see here basic sequence startup template, and you see here a basic sequence end template, and a basic sequence target template. And so we can get a better sense as to what these different areas do by taking a look at some of these templates. But before we do that, I have to go over one more thing before we open these things up, and that is this section here called instruction set. The instruction sets are containers. They're containers that hold instructions, triggers, and looping conditions. Okay? Instructions are actions that you want n.i.n.a to take with a particular piece of equipment, or it may be a function of time, or it may be a function of where the object is in the sky. It's some kind of action that you want n.i.n.a to do and to execute. You then have triggers. What triggers are is that after every action is executed, n.i.n.a will go back and look at that trigger to see if a condition has been met for that trigger to execute. And if it hasn't, then it passes by that trigger and then goes to the next instruction in your sequence and executes it. And basically it loops through those triggers each and every time it goes through an instruction. You may have a trigger in there to do a meridian flip, or you may have a trigger in there to autofocus after the HFR has increased by 10% or whatever. And so After each instruction, n.i.n.a will just review the triggers and say, has this condition been met? And if not, then it just continues on with the sequence. And that's what a trigger is. And then the other kind of object that you have is what's called a loop condition. And a loop is basically just saying, for instance, like if you have, let's say that I'm doing mono imaging and I'm doing hydrogen alpha, oxygen 2, and oxygen 3 and sulfur 2, and I just want to loop through these 20 times, then I can put in a loop condition saying, yeah, I want to loop through this set of instructions 20 times. And that's basically a loop condition. So those are the kinds of instructions. But then you've got instruction sets up here. So you got a deep sky instruction set that has all of your information relating to your deep sky object, as well as any other instructions that you may want to add in there. But that's where you put your target information. That's where you put your imaging session relating to that target. Anything relating to that target that you're imaging goes into that particular container. And then you got two other kind of container types. The first one is a parallel instruction set. And what that is, it's a container that you can use where all the instructions that you put into that container are all executed together at the same time. And so what it means, if you put in like cool camera and unpark the scope, it will execute both of those actions at the same time. And then a sequential instruction set is, let's say you got A, B, and C. You don't execute B until A is done. So A will go through and do its thing, goes and checks the triggers, comes back down to B, does B, goes back, checks through all the triggers, and then executes C. So it's done in a sequential basis. Triggers for parallel instruction sets. So let's say that you've got cool camera and unpark your scope. It will execute these two at the same time, and only when both have been completed will it then go and loop and check through the triggers to see if any trigger conditions have taken place. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, just leave comments down below and I'll try to explain it better if I can figure out a way to do it. And so those are the different kinds of instructions. And you have instruction sets here. So if we go back here to templates, you're going to see here that we have a basic sequence end and a basic sequence startup and then a basic sequence target. And these are templates that come with n.i.n.a. And you can see that they are templates. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to drag and drop, like this is the basic sequence end, and we're going to put it into the end. Right there, sequence end. And there we are. So this is how our sequence is going to end. And then let's go to sequence startup. And we put it in there. And that's how our sequence is going to start up. And I'll go through these in just a minute. And then let's go to basic sequence target. And that goes here into the sequence target area. Okay. So a lot of stuff here. Let's kind of walk through it as quickly as we can. It's probably the best way to kind of explain the advanced sequencer, if you will. So here we are at basic sequence startup. So essentially we can tell two things. Number one, that this is a container. You can see it by this open box. This is a container, meaning that we can shove instructions inside this box. Think of a container as a box, and you can throw stuff into that box. That's what this is. It's a parallel instruction set, which means that everything in this box is going to happen at the same time. So in this particular case, as we said, they have it annotated here. This set of instructions will be executed in parallel and prepare your equipment to start a sequence. Add or remove items based upon your requirements. So what will happen is when we execute this, if I was to click this go button down here, it would start off here and say, okay, it's a parallel set, so I'm going to cool the camera and I'm going to unpark the scope and I'm going to do those at the same time. That's a parallel instruction set. And you can see the box here. You can see where it's bound by the darker green. This is a self-contained container. So I can throw additional instructions in here if I want, and every instruction that I throw in here will be executed at the same time with all the other instructions because it's a parallel instruction set. Before we get into the basic sequence target, let's just go here to the basic end. And this will show you some nested containers. And so what we have here, first of all, is we got sequence N. You can see that this is a sequential instruction set. And you can tell that because of the 3 dots, which means it's going to execute A, and then when A is done, it will check target, it will check for any triggers, and then it will go to B and execute and check for any triggers, and then go to C, and so forth and so forth. Well, we have nested in this sequential instruction set a parallel instruction set. And so essentially what's going to happen is it's going to go through this instruction and it's going to say, okay, I have another container. I have a box within a box. So let me open up this box and oh, this is a parallel. So everything here is going to run together as one instruction. So this is my instruction A. I'm going to warm the camera and I'm going to park the scope. And I'm going to do those at the very same time. And so that's what will happen. And that's the first action that will take place. And we got parallel action within a sequential container. Hopefully that makes some sense. Once both of these are completed, I will then check to see if there's any triggers. If there aren't any triggers, I then go down and I execute the next instruction, which in this case is an external script. If I have an external script, I could plug it in here and it will run that script for me, or any other kind of things, like maybe I want to power off something. There are plugins where you can power off pieces of equipment, so I could do that. I could power off the mount. I could do all kinds of things. That would be in my basic sequence N, and I can put in an instruction. So each one of these items is an instruction. It's telling n.i.n.a that something needs to happen, something needs to take place. And you notice here that you got another instruction type, which is called an annotation. You can make notes to yourself. So as you're going through this, if you're not really if you want to document why you're doing what you're doing, you just throw in the annotation instruction and you type it in there, and you'll be able to track why you are doing what you're doing. So that's the basic sequence end. And then we go up here to the basic sequence target. This is a little more complicated. It's a bigger set of instructions here. So what you have is the basic sequence target is your big box, if you will. And inside this box, you're going to have things like target information and exposure information. So these are your 2 big areas. Your target, so this is what your target is going to be, and you'll select your target typically through the Sky Atlas and the Framing Wizard, and you'll just go over here to targets, and you can plug that target into here, and it will populate all this for you. And then you've got a section here called exposure info, and then you notice here when I close this, it looks a lot like the legacy sequencer. But basically what that does is it just rolls up a lot of this other stuff down here. So let's take a look at this. So we got the basic sequence target. You see the outline of the box. So it's the master container. So everything is going to execute in containers within this, and you can see that we got nested containers here. So here we have a place for triggers. We don't have any triggers for the target itself. We have loop conditions. We don't have any loop conditions for the target itself. but we do have some instructions for the target. And the first set of instructions is slew, center, and rotate. And then we're going to run an autofocus, and we're going to start guiding. And because everything in a basic sequence target is sequential, it's not parallel, so it's going to slew, center, and rotate first, and then it's going to check for triggers or any loop conditions, and then it's going to go down and run autofocus, and then check for triggers, loop conditions, and then come down here and it's going to start guiding. Now, you see here that we have another container, and this is the, if we go over here to instructions, this is a sequential instruction set. And what this set right here is called is targeting imaging instructions. And so this is how we're going to target our particular image. So you notice here we got things in here. We got triggers. We have 3 triggers. We have a meridian flip trigger. We have autofocus after HFR increase trigger. And then we have an autofocus after filter change trigger. So depending on what kind of imaging you're doing, if any of these conditions are met as it's going through the sequences, it will execute that particular trigger before it continues on in the rest of the sequence. So this box is a secondary master box. So everything inside this box, these triggers now impact all of this information. And this right here is your actual exposure run information. And you notice here there's also a smart exposure run down here as well. So all of these things, both those that are inside this container and the instructions that's outside of the containers. Not all instructions have to be containerized. In other words, this smart exposure and this annotation is part of the targeting imaging instructions container, as well as the 20 by 300 seconds is part of the targeting imaging instructions container. So you got containers and instructions can be together in a container. And this is where it just really kind of gets tricky, because you can nest containers. As you can see, we got the targeting imaging instructions is nested inside of the target basic sequence target container, and then we've got the 20 by 30s is nested inside of that, and so we got a nest that's 3 containers deep. So it can, like I say, it can get pretty tricky. So what this is basically just showing you 2 different ways that you can run your image acquisition. In this case here, we got dither after 3 exposures, which is a trigger. So when I'm going through this, it's going to look at these triggers, and then it's going to look at this trigger. And it does a count as to how many exposures that I've taken. And you see here, loop for iterations, 20 iterations. So here's a loop condition. So I basically, what this is basically saying is I'm going to take a 300-second exposure, and it's going to be a light, and it's going to use the current filter, whatever that filter is. I don't have any filter wheel hooked up to this thing yet, so it's just going to say current, but it could very easily say L, luminance, or maybe I'm not using a filter, in which case there won't be anything there, and I could just get rid of that particular instruction. And then whatever the camera metrics are here. And so basically what I'm saying here is, for this set of instructions, is I'm going to do 300-second exposures. I'm going to dither after every 3 exposures, and I'm going to loop through this 20 times. And as I'm looping through this 20 times, I'm also going to be looking at these triggers, like, is it time for a meridian flip? Has my HFR increased? Have I changed filters? And if none of those conditions are met, then I go down here. Do I dither? Nope, don't need to dither. I'm on iteration number 18, so I got 2 more iterations to go. Let me go ahead and take the filter. Let me go ahead and take the image. And that's basically how that runs. And then you got down here, once that runs, and that's done, you then will take 20 0-second, for whatever reason, we can say that this could be, 300 seconds so that it matches this up here. And basically what this is showing you is two different ways to do the same thing. Okay, so the smart exposure, you can put in a loop. You can say, I want to do this 20 times. You can say that I want to dither every 3. So you don't need to have a dither trigger. You don't need to have a loop for iterations loop condition. All that is built into some of these instructions. It just depends on what you want to do. And I can tell it, what filter that I want to do on. So basically, all 4 of these instructions, triggers and loops, is really nested all here into one instruction. So that's kind of what that is showing you. Now, if you have a session set up and you're happy with that session, let's say that I was shooting M31 and that was my target and I have it all in here, I can save this session out. And so to do that, I would come here and I would save complete sequence to new JSON file. So I could say, okay, I'm going to call this thing test sequence. And in this case, I already got one, but I'm just going to go ahead and overwrite it. Okay. And then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to delete the whole entire sequence. Clear? Yep. Okay. Now I can go down here to this and I can open this. And yes, we're going to lose all changes. And I got my test sequence right there that I just saved out. And it will show up right here. Pretty slick. Now, each item within these areas, we can go over all of this stuff here in just a quick second here. One more thing to touch upon is if you're loading a session that you've already done previously and you want to reset everything so you're starting off fresh, it doesn't delete the session information, it just clears all the counters. So for instance, let's say that the session ended and you still had 3 more out of that loop of 20 and you want to reset it so you do all 20 again. That's what this button up here does. This button right here resets. So it resets the complete sequence run and you say yes, and it just resets all the internal counters that are part of the actual sequence. And then this button here, if you want to add an instruction to an instruction set, I find that it's just easier to come over here and just drag and drop in as you see fit, as you need. But if you want to, you can just click on that and you can just add an instruction set. And this right here is if you got like a global trigger, you can add a trigger to the instruction set. And so each of these containers here, they all share similar buttons. Okay, so this one here is I can save this in current instruction set out as a template for reusage. And that's part of the problem that we'll probably talk about with the advanced sequencer, is that you can't save, you can save out a sequence as a sequence for a target, but you can't save out a sequence that you build here as a unified template. Instead, each area you can make it into a template, and you'll always be having to load 3 templates in: opening template, your session information template, and then your session end template. And so what many of us do is we put all that into the session target area. We just make that a whole complete thing, so that way we can create templates and reuse them and not worry about the start area and the end area, because you don't have to have those. You can have that information in your sequence target area because you can save all that out as one template. So it depends on how you want to structure things. And n.i.n.a basically gives you that flexibility. So this is if you want to save this template out, or save this thing out as a template. It already exists as a template, so I'm not going to do that. This is if you want to enable or disable it. So you can choose, if you've already got your camera cooled and you've already unparked your scope, but you're running the sequence, you can just disable this and it will just disable it, meaning that it will just ignore this, and then we can turn it back on. We can delete this. We can delete this whole instruction set. We can reset just this instruction set, and we can copy this instruction set and make a second instruction set. And then here we can move things up and down. So we can move it down, and now this instruction set, basic sequence startup, is now in the different container area. It's now in the session target area. So let's move it back up. So now it's back into the session startup. The only other one that has a different button is the target sequence, and that is save the current target and all of its contents for reusage. This is essentially the same thing as coming down here and saving the whole entire sequence file. Only what this does is this will actually save out just this, whatever is in that sequence target area, it will save it out. And again, you can also save it out as a template. You can start or stop it. You can remove it, delete it, you can reset it, you can copy it, you can also move it up and down, just like I showed you. These buttons down here, you've already seen me use this button, which is really a save as button, and then I can just click this. This just saves. As you see over here, it just saves it as test sequence because I've already named this sequence as test sequence. So this is a save button. That's a save as button if you're in Windows, and this is open up. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And then at the end of the day, if I want to run this sequence, I just go ahead and I can just hit run. And you notice that all these templates that I used here are all here. They come default. And I haven't selected any targets, so probably next time we'll go through the Sky Atlas and framing and we'll select ourselves a target, but probably what we need to do first is build ourselves a template that we can use, and that will be the next video. So if you found any of this to be helpful, and I'm sorry that this ran over, this is just really not an easy thing to kind of grasp. There's a lot of pieces and parts, but if you found this at all to be interesting or helpful, please go ahead and like the video and maybe even subscribe. And if you have any comments or questions, throw them down below. I am by no stretch of the imagination an expert. I am not an expert, but I've been using n.i.n.a for a little bit, so I know a little something about it, and if I can answer your questions, I'll be more than happy to do so. So until next time, clear skies and happy guiding.